She packed her bags on their 3rd anniversary, desperate to escape the ruthless underworld her husband ruled. She thought she covered her tracks perfectly, but in her panicked rush to vanish, she left behind the one thing that would guarantee the Mafia boss would tear the world apart to find her a positive pregnancy test. The master bathroom of the Castellano estate in Long Island was roughly the size of a standard apartment, clad in imported black marble and gold fixtures. It was a testament to unimaginable wealth, a monument to the power of Daniel Castellano. But to Rebecca Castellano it felt like the walls of a very expensive, very beautiful tomb. Rebecca stood before the massive vanity mirror, her hands gripping the cold edges of the sink. She took a deep, trembling breath, forcing herself to meet her own gaze. She was a fat woman. She had always been. Soft, thick, carrying weight in her hips, her stomach, and her arms. In her 20s, before the Mafia, before Daniel, she had learned to love her body. She had embraced her curves, finding comfort and beauty in her own skin. But this world, the dark, blood-soaked, image-obsessed underbelly of New York's elite crime syndicates, was not kind to women who didn't fit a highly specific, surgically enhanced mold. Among the starved, razor-sharp wives of Daniel's capos and associates, Rebecca was an anomaly. She knew what they whispered at charity galas and private dinners. Why her, what does the boss see in her? She looks like a civilian. She looks soft. Daniel had never cared about the whispers. From the moment he had walked into the bakery, she managed in Queens 4 years ago, bleeding from a superficial gunshot wound and demanding a quiet place to hide, he had looked at her like she was the only oxygen left in the room. He worshipped her body. He treated her softness as his ultimate sanctuary. When his hands, calloused and stained with the metaphorical and sometimes literal blood of his enemies, held her, they were endlessly gentle. But love wasn't enough anymore. The sanctuary was burning. For the past 6 months, a brutal turf war with the Rossi syndicate had turned Daniel from a fiercely protective husband into a paranoid, volatile ghost. He slept 3 hours a night. He walked the halls of their estate with a loaded Glock in his hand. 2 weeks ago, Rebecca had woken up to find him sitting on the edge of their bed in the dark, his white dress shirt completely soaked in crimson. It wasn't his blood. He wouldn't tell her whose it was. He just pulled her against his chest, shaking, and begged her never to leave him. She couldn't live like this. The constant anxiety was a physical weight, heavier than anything she carried on her bones. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway made her jump. A sudden knock on the door sent her heart into her throat. She was 28 years old, and she was decaying inside this golden cage. Today was their 3rd wedding anniversary. Downstairs, a lavish party was being set up. Caterers were carrying trays of champagne. Florists were arranging thousands of white roses. Daniel had insisted on the party. A show of strength, he had called it. We have to show the Rossis that the Castellano family is unbothered, untouchable. She wasn't his wife tonight. She was a prop. Rebecca looked down at the marble counter. Lying next to her diamond-encrusted hairpins and a tube of expensive lipstick was a plastic white stick. 2 bright, unmistakable pink lines. Pregnant. A tear broke free, tracking hotly down her cheek. She pressed a hand to her stomach. She had suspected it for 2 weeks, the nausea, the sudden aversion to the smell of Daniel's morning espresso, the heavy exhaustion. But seeing the irrefutable proof was a physical blow. I am going to have a baby, she thought, the realization crashing over her like a tidal wave. A baby born into a war. She pictured a little boy with Daniel's dark, intense eyes, learning to shoot before he learned to ride a bike. She pictured a little girl surrounded by bodyguards taught to suspect everyone, eventually married off to cement an alliance. The thought made her physically sick. She loved Daniel. God help her, she loved the monster. But she could not hand an innocent child over to this life. She had to run. Today. Tonight. The chaos of the anniversary party was the perfect cover. There would be hundreds of people, external staff, open gates, and distracted security. It was the only window she would get before the gates locked down again. Rebecca moved with a sudden manic energy. She had a go bag hidden in the back of her expansive walk-in closet for months, tucked behind a row of winter coats. She had slowly, painstakingly siphoned untraceable cash from her grocery allowances, accumulating a little over $40,000. She had a burner phone and a fake AD provided by Rachel, an old friend from her bakery days, who knew absolutely nothing about the Mafia, but knew Rebecca was in trouble. She went to the closet and pulled the duffel bag free. She changed out of her silk robe and began to prepare for the gala, her mind racing. She had to play the part. She had to smile, drink sparkling cider, masquerading as champagne, and kiss her husband for the cameras. But as she walked back into the bathroom to start her makeup, a sharp knock echoed on the bedroom door. "Rebecca." It was Maria, their head housekeeper. "Mr. Castellano is asking for you. The guests are beginning to arrive." "I'll be right down, Maria," Rebecca called out, her voice remarkably steady. She looked back at the vanity, the pregnancy test. If Daniel saw that he would lock her in a vault, he would never let her out of his sight again. His possessiveness, already bordering on obsessive, would become absolute tyranny. In her frantic state, her hands shaking, Rebecca grabbed the plastic stick. She tossed it into the small gold-rimmed wastebasket beside the toilet. She grabbed a handful of makeup wipes and a few crumpled tissues, throwing them over the test, burying it at the bottom. It was a fatal, careless mistake, born of sheer panic. But Rebecca didn't know that yet. She only knew she was out of time. She turned off the bathroom. Light smoothed down the skirt of her custom-made emerald green gown, a dress designed to accentuate her curves, the very curves Daniel loved so much, and walked out to face her husband for the last time. The grand ballroom of the Castellano estate was blindingly bright. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light over the elite of New York's underworld, all dressed in bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted meats, and the sharp tang of danger that always accompanied a gathering of wolves. Rebecca stood near the edge of the dance floor, a forced, dazzling smile painted on her face. Her emerald dress hugged her full figure perfectly. She knew she looked beautiful, but she felt like an imposter. "Rebecca, darling." A sharp, cloying voice sliced through the jazz music playing in the background. Rebecca braced herself as Camilla Rossi, ironically, a distant cousin of the rival family, married to one of Daniel's top earners, glided over. Camilla was shockingly thin, all sharp angles and cheekbones wrapped in silver silk. "Camilla," Rebecca nodded politely. "You look lovely." Camilla's eyes raked over Rebecca's body, a subtle sneer playing on her lips. "Thank you. And you look very comfortable. Green is certainly a choice. It's so brave of you to wear something so fitted. I always say, confidence is the best accessory for bigger girls." The backhanded compliment stung a familiar prick of venom, but tonight it only fueled Rebecca's resolve. "Enjoy your hollow blood-soaked world," Rebecca thought. "I won't be here to deal with you tomorrow." "Excuse me," Rebecca said sweetly. "I need to find my husband." She navigated through the crowd, her eyes scanning the room. She spotted him near the terrace doors. Daniel Castellano. Even in a room full of dangerous men, he was the center of gravity. tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp, aristocratic features, and eyes so dark they looked like obsidian. He was speaking quietly to his underboss, Matteo. The tension radiating from Daniel's jaw was palpable. As Rebecca approached, Daniel caught sight of her. His entire demeanor shifted. The cold, calculating mob boss melted away, replaced by the man who had bought her a bakery and filled her apartment with sunflowers. He dismissed Matteo with a flick of his chin and stepped toward her, pulling her effortlessly against his chest. "You look breathtaking," Daniel murmured, kissing the side of her neck right below her ear. His voice was a low, rough rumble. "I hate every man in this room for looking at you." Rebecca closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and rain. A fresh wave of heartbreak hit her. She loved him. She really did. But she couldn't save him, and she couldn't let him drag their baby into the abyss. "Daniel," she whispered, pulling back slightly to look into his eyes. "Can we leave just for 10 minutes? Let's go upstairs." His eyes softened, but then a shadow crossed his face. He glanced over her shoulder toward the entrance. "I can't, Katina. Not yet. I'm waiting on a text from Chicago. The shipment arrives tonight. Once it's secure, I promise you, I will throw everyone out of this house and spend the next 3 days making it up to you. After this deal is done..." It was always the same excuse. The violence would never end. "Okay," Rebecca said, her voice barely a whisper. She reached up and touched his cheek. She memorized the rough stubble, the sharp angle of his jaw, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow. "Happy anniversary, Dom." "Happy anniversary, my life," he replied, kissing her deeply, thoroughly oblivious to the eyes on them. "Give me 1 hour." He turned away, pulling his phone from his tuxedo pocket, already slipping back into the dark. That was the cue. It was now or never. Rebecca turned and walked smoothly toward the back of the ballroom. She smiled at guests, nodded at security guards, portraying the perfect, relaxed hostess. She pushed through the swinging doors into the massive commercial kitchen. It was chaotic chefs, shouting waiters rushing past with silver platters. No one paid attention to the boss's wife walking through. They assumed she was checking on the service. She slipped through the pantry and into the servants' corridor. This part of the house wasn't covered by the high-tech security cameras Daniel had installed for external threats. She hurried up the back staircase, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Reaching the master suite, she locked the door behind her. She had roughly 20 minutes before Daniel might come looking for her, maybe less if he got his text early. She stripped off the emerald gown, leaving it pooled on the expensive Persian rug. She wiped off the heavy evening makeup scrubbing until her face was pale and bare. She dressed quickly in black leggings, a loose grey hoodie that hid the slight newly formed curve of her stomach, and comfortable running shoes. She grabbed her pre-packed duffel bag from the closet. She checked the side pocket, the burner phone, the cash, the fake ID, identifying her as Sarah Jenkins. Then she walked to the bedside table. She took off her massive diamond engagement ring and the platinum wedding band. Her finger felt instantly light bare and painfully cold. She placed the rings on Daniel's pillow. Beside them, she left a simple, handwritten note. "Dom, I love you, but I cannot survive your world. Do not look for me. Let me go. Rebecca." It was cruel, she knew. It would destroy him. But a clean break was the only way. She hoisted the bag onto her shoulder and slipped out of the room, taking the service elevator down to the basement. The basement led to an underground garage used for staff deliveries. Rachel had arranged for a private car service, driven by an older, discreet driver named Thomas, to wait just outside the delivery gates. Rebecca had paid him $10,000 in cash to drive her to a motel in Pennsylvania, no questions asked. The cool night air hit her face, as she slipped out of the side door. The music from the ballroom was a muffled, distant thumping. She kept to the shadows of the tall hedges, moving as fast as she could with the heavy bag. There, idling quietly by the service gate, was a black sedan. The gate normally guarded was currently open for a catering truck to back in. The guard was distracted, arguing with the driver over a manifest. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She darted through the gap, opened the back door of the sedan, and threw herself inside. "Thomas!" She breathed, terrified. The older man in the driver's seat looked in the rearview mirror. "Yes, ma'am? Sarah?" "Yes, go. Please just drive." The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the dark, winding roads of Long Island. Rebecca sank low into the leather seat, pulling the hood of her sweatshirt up over her head. She looked out the back window, watching the lights of the Castellano estate shrink into the distance until they disappeared entirely. She was out. She had vanished. She was free. She pressed her hand to her stomach, breathing a shaky sigh of relief. She had done it. She had left no trail, no digital footprint, no clues. She was just a ghost in the wind. Or so she thought. It was 1:15 a.m. when Daniel finally walked away from the business of the evening. The Chicago shipment was secure. The Rossi family had remained quiet. The party was winding down, guests slowly filtering out into the waiting valets. He unbuttoned his tuxedo jacket, exhaustion finally sinking into his bones. All he wanted was to bury his face in his wife's soft neck, wrap his arms around her warm, full body, and sleep for 12 hours. He walked up the grand staircase, nodding dismissively to the guard stationed at the landing. He pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to the master suite. "Rebecca, amore mio, I'm sorry it took so long." The room was dark and silent. Daniel paused, his instincts, honed by years of surviving assassination attempts and betrayals, instantly flared. The air in the room felt wrong, empty. He flipped on the lights. The bed was unmade, untouched. In the center of the room, discarded carelessly on the floor, was the custom emerald gown she had been wearing just hours ago. "Rebecca." He called out, his voice sharper this time, a rough edge of panic bleeding into it. He strode into the bathroom. Empty. The closet. Empty. He walked back into the bedroom, his eyes scanning the space. That was when he saw it. The glint of diamonds on his pillow. Daniel's breath hitched. He walked slowly to the bed as if approaching a bomb. He picked up the rings. His hands, which had steadily held a gun to a man's head just a month ago without a tremor, were shaking. He saw the folded piece of paper beneath them. He read the words, "I cannot survive your world. Do not look for me. Let me go." For a full 10 seconds, Daniel stood completely frozen. The silence in the room roared in his ears. Then the shock shattered, replaced by a volcanic, world-ending rage. "Matteo!" Daniel roared, the sound tearing from his throat like a wounded animal. Within seconds, the bedroom door burst open. Matteo, gun drawn, rushed in, followed by 2 massive security guards. "Boss, what is it? Are we under attack?" Matteo barked, scanning the room. Daniel turned around. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror and fury. "Lock down the estate. Nobody leaves. Not the guests, not the staff, no, not the fucking caterers. Close the gates." "Dom, what's going on?" Matteo asked, lowering his weapon, slightly confused. "She's gone!" Daniel snarled, crushing the note in his fist. "My wife is missing." Missing? Did someone take her? Was it the Rossis? "I don't know," Daniel shouted, kicking a solid oak side chair so hard it shattered against the far wall. She left her rings. She left a note. But someone could have forced her to write it. If they breached this house, if the Rossis got to her while I was downstairs drinking champagne, I will burn this entire city to the ground. Find her. Check the cameras. rip every car outside apart. The next hour was pure chaos. The Castellano estate turned into a military compound. Armed men detained terrified guests. The security footage was reviewed frame by frame, but they found nothing conclusive. The cameras showed Rebecca walking into the kitchen, but the internal servant corridors had no surveillance. There was a brief blind spot near the service gates, where a catering truck had blocked the view. Daniel paced the bedroom, his mind spiraling into dark, violent scenarios. Was she in the trunk of a car? Was she terrified? Or had she truly just walked away because she hated him, because she couldn't stand the sight of him anymore? The thought of her leaving him voluntarily was almost more agonizing than the thought of her being kidnapped. He needed to think. He needed to find a clue. He dismissed his men, ordering them to canvass the streets, and locked himself in the suite. He walked into the bathroom, splashing freezing cold water on his face. He leaned heavily on the marble counter, staring at his haggard reflection. His eyes were bloodshot. He had failed his one job, keeping her safe, keeping her happy. He paced the length of the massive bathroom. He needed to know what she took. He needed to understand her mindset. He turned sharply, his foot catching the edge of the gold-rimmed wastebasket beside the toilet. The basket tipped over, clattering loudly against the marble floor. Trash spilled out. Makeup wipes, a few empty bottles, crumpled tissues. Daniel bent down with an irritated sigh to right the basket. As he reached for the trash, his hand froze mid-air. There, lying stark white against the black marble floor, partially uncovered from the tissues, was a plastic stick. Daniel stared at it. His brain wired for threats, and logistics took a few seconds to process what he was looking at. He reached out slowly, picking up the small plastic device. 2 pink lines. The air left his lungs in a rush. He dropped to his knees right there on the bathroom floor. "Pregnant," he whispered to the empty room. He brought a trembling hand to his mouth. Rebecca was pregnant. His wife was carrying his child. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train, completely altering the landscape of the situation. She hadn't just left because she was tired of the Mafia life. She had run because she was terrified for their baby. She had fled to protect his child from his world. From him. The crushing guilt was instantly incinerated by a sudden, overwhelming wave of possessive, primal instinct. She was out there pregnant, alone, vulnerable. A fat, beautiful, soft woman, carrying the heir to the Castellano Empire, driving into the dark with no protection. If the Rossis found out she was alone, if anyone found out. Daniel stood up. The frantic panic from minutes ago was gone. What replaced it was something far more terrifying. It was a cold, calculated, absolutely unhinged determination. He pulled out his phone and dialed Matteo. "Boss," Matteo answered, out of breath. "We have a lead. One of the catering guards said he saw a black sedan idle near the gates around the time she vanished, but he didn't get the plates." "I don't care what it costs," Daniel said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding like the Grim Reaper himself. "I want every traffic camera on Long Island hacked. I want every toll booth checked. I want the cell phone data of every single person who was in this house tonight, downloaded and analyzed. Dom, that's going to cost millions. We'll draw the feds." "I don't give a fuck about the feds." "Matteo!" Daniel roared into the phone. "She's pregnant." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Mother of God," Matteo finally breathed. "She is carrying my child." Daniel said, his dark eyes fixed on his reflection in the mirror, looking at the monster Rebecca had run from. "Mobilize everyone. Put a bounty out to our contacts, $5 million for her safe return, $10 million if they bring her back tonight. She has no idea what she's done. I am going to find her. And when I do, I am never, ever letting her out of my sight again. Daniel crushed the pregnancy test gently in his hand, holding it like a lifeline. The hunt was on, and God help anyone who stood between the boss and his family. The neon sign of the Red Roof Inn off Interstate 78 in Allentown, Pennsylvania, flickered with a pathetic, buzzing hum. It was a far cry from the imported marble and silent, climate-controlled halls of the Castellano estate. Here the air smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and industrial bleach. Rebecca sat on the edge of the lumpy floral-patterned bedspread. She had traded her custom emerald gown for baggy grey sweatpants and a worn-out flannel shirt. She wrapped her arms around her thick waist, resting her hands over her stomach. Her belly, usually soft and round, felt tight with anxiety. She rubbed the familiar curves, whispering softly to the tiny life growing inside her. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly in the quiet, dingy room. "We're safe now. He's not going to find us." She was lying to the baby, and she was lying to herself. She walked over to the scratched wooden dresser and counted her cash. $39,800. It felt like a fortune when she was stuffing it into hollowed-out books in her closet, but out here in the real world, facing medical bills, fake identities, and housing, it was a terrifyingly finite resource. Back in New York, the underworld was currently being torn apart at the seams. Daniel's command center had been relocated from his private office to the estate's massive underground bunker. It was a room usually reserved for coordinating wars against rival syndicates. Tonight it was dedicated to a single fat, beautiful runaway. Matteo stood before a bank of glowing monitors, his face pale. Around him, a dozen of the family's top hackers and fixers were working frantically. Daniel stood at the center of the room, completely still, radiating a lethal, freezing aura. He hadn't changed out of his tuxedo pants and white dress shirt, though the bow tie was gone and the collar was ripped open. "Status?" Daniel demanded, his voice dangerously soft. Matteo swallowed hard. "Boss, we've hit the city grid. We ran facial recognition on all toll booths leaving Long Island, the George Washington Bridge, and the Lincoln Tunnel." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And find her. If she trips, I want to know before she hits the ground. Nothing concrete on the facial recognition yet," Matteo admitted, flinching as Daniel's eyes snapped to him. "But we didn't just rely on cameras. We squeezed the catering staff. One of the prep cooks broke. He said he saw a black Lincoln Town car idling near the service entrance. He gave us a partial plate." Daniel stepped forward, resting his heavy ringed hands on the metal table. "Run it." "We did. It belongs to a private off-the-books transport service in Queens, run by an old-timer named Thomas Shelby. No relation to the TV show, just a local guy. Known for driving high-end clients who want zero paper trail." "Bring him to me," Daniel ordered. "Boss Vincent and Leo already grabbed him. He's in the warehouse." Daniel didn't say another word. He turned on his heel and strode out of the bunker. The drive to the warehouse in Brooklyn took 20 minutes. When Daniel walked through the rusting metal doors, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thomas, a heavy-set man in his late 60s, was strapped to a metal chair. He was bleeding from a split lip, but he looked more terrified than physically broken. Vincent stood nearby, cracking his knuckles. "Leave us," Daniel commanded. The heavy steel door clattered shut as his men exited. Daniel slowly pulled a metal folding chair and sat directly in front of the terrified driver. For a long moment, he just looked at him. "My men tell me you drive people who want to disappear," Daniel said, his voice eerily calm. "Tonight you drove my wife. I didn't know who she was, Mr. Castellano. I swear to God, a girl named Rachel set it up. Paid in cash." Daniel's eyes flared at the name, Rachel, the bakery friend. He made a mental note to have Matteo pay her a highly unpleasant visit. But right now, only one thing mattered. "Where is she, Thomas?" She paid for absolute discretion. Daniel leaned forward, pulling the heavy custom 1911 pistol from his shoulder holster. He didn't point it at Thomas. Instead, he placed it gently on the table between them. "My wife is pregnant." Daniel stated the words, tasting like blood and honey in his mouth. "She is carrying my heir. She is out there alone and vulnerable. If a rival family finds her because you delayed me by 5 minutes, I will not just kill you. I will systematically dismantle everyone you have ever loved. But if you tell me exactly where you dropped her, I will give you $100,000 and a one-way ticket to a country of your choosing." Daniel offered a terrifyingly simple choice. Silence. Absolute, agonizing destruction of his bloodline. Cooperation, wealth, and survival. Thomas looked at the gun, then at the mob boss's hollow, desperate eyes. He broke instantly. "Allentown," Thomas choked out. "Pennsylvania. A Red Roof Inn right off the highway. Room 114. I dropped her there at 3 in the morning." Daniel stood up, holstering his weapon. "Get him his money. Put him on a plane." He ordered his men through the door. He pulled out his cell phone, dialing his pilot. "Fuel the jet. We're flying to Pennsylvania." The morning sun filtered through the cheap blinds of room 114, casting harsh lines of light across Rebecca's face. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, not the monster, but the man who would kiss her soft stomach and tell her she was his entire world. She forced herself out of bed. The nausea hit her like a physical blow. She rushed to the tiny linoleum-tiled bathroom, emptying the meager contents of her stomach into the toilet. She sat back on her heels, wiping her mouth with a scratchy towel, tears prickling her eyes. She needed prenatal vitamins. She needed real food. She couldn't just hide in this room forever. Pulling her grey hoodie up and throwing on a pair of oversized dark sunglasses, Rebecca grabbed her purse. She stepped out into the crisp Pennsylvania morning. The air here didn't smell like ocean salt and wealth. It smelled like exhaust fumes and diner coffee. She walked 2 blocks to a local CVS pharmacy. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the few locals out on the street. Her thick thighs rubbed together rhythmically. As she walked, a familiar friction she usually didn't mind. But today, it just made her feel slow, vulnerable. Inside the brightly lit pharmacy, she navigated the aisles until she found the family planning section. She grabbed 2 bottles of high-grade prenatal vitamins, a bottle of water, and some saltine crackers to settle her stomach. She approached the checkout counter. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager, snapping a piece of pink gum, barely looked up. "That'll be $42.16, the teenager droned. Rebecca reached into her bag, pulling out a $50 bill. As the cashier handed back her change, Rebecca glanced up at the small television mounted in the corner of the store. It was tuned to a local news station. Her blood ran ice cold. There, flashing on the screen, was a picture of her. It wasn't a mugshot or a paparazzi photo. It was a beautiful, candid photo Daniel had taken of her, laughing on his yacht last summer in Capri. The headline beneath it blared in bright yellow, "Missing New York Socialite, Rebecca Castellano. $5 million reward for information." "Holy crap," the teenage cashier suddenly said, pointing at the screen and then staring directly at Rebecca. Her gum snapping stopped. Her eyes widened, flicking from the TV screen to the plump, beautiful face, partially hidden behind the sunglasses. "Are you—" Panic raw and blinding seized Rebecca's chest. "Keep the change," Rebecca blurted out, grabbing her plastic bag and practically running toward the automatic doors. She burst out onto the sidewalk, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. $5 million. He had put a public civilian bounty on her. He wasn't just using the underworld. He was using the whole damn country. Anyone with a smartphone was now looking for her. She needed to get back to the motel, grab her bag, and run. She had to buy a used car with cash drive, west, maybe to Ohio or Indiana. She hurried down the street, her breath coming in short, harsh gasps. Her body, soft and unaccustomed to running, protested loudly. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She rounded the corner, the Red Roof Inn coming into view, and then she stopped dead in her tracks. The cheap, pothole-riddled parking lot of the motel was no longer empty. 3 massive matte-black Cadillac Escalades were parked at sharp angles, completely blocking the entrance and exit. Men in dark suits were swarming the property. Rebecca ducked behind a large oak tree on the adjacent property line, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. She watched in absolute terror as room 114's door was violently kicked open. 2 armed men rushed inside. A moment later, they emerged, shaking their heads. Then the back door of the lead Escalade opened. Daniel stepped out onto the cheap asphalt. He looked like an avenging god descending into hell. He was no longer in his tuxedo. He wore black slacks and a fitted black turtleneck, a dark wool overcoat draped over his broad shoulders. He looked utterly exhausted, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes were scanning the perimeter with the terrifying precision of a predator. He was here. He found her in less than 12 hours. Rebecca pressed her back against the rough bark of the tree, sliding down until she was sitting in the damp grass. She curled her knees to her chest, her hands wrapped tightly around her stomach. He's going to take me back. He's going to lock me away. My baby will be born into a war zone. She had to move. The woods behind the motel led to a residential neighborhood. If she could just slip through the trees, maybe she could flag down a taxi or steal a bicycle. It was pathetic, but it was all she had. She pushed herself up her knees, trembling. She took 1 step backward, stepping heavily on a dry, dead branch. Crack! The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet morning air. By the Escalades, Daniel's head snapped toward the tree line. His dark eyes locked onto the exact spot where she was hiding. "There!" Vincent shouted, pointing toward the trees. Rebecca didn't think. She just turned and ran. She plunged into the woods branches, whipping against her face, her heavy breaths tearing through her throat. She pushed her body harder than she ever had, her hands instinctively shielding her stomach as she navigated the uneven, root-covered ground. "Rebecca!" "Oh!" Daniel's roar tore through the trees, a sound of such profound, desperate agony that it made her stumble. "Stop! Please!" She ignored him, pushing through a thicket of thorn bushes, the sharp briars tearing at her sweatpants and scratching her legs. She burst through the tree line, tumbling out onto a quiet suburban street. She scrambled to her feet, looking wildly for an escape route. A woman watering her lawn stared at her in shock. Before Rebecca could take another step, the screech of tires filled the air. One of the black Escalades had bypassed the woods and driven straight down the residential road, cutting her off completely. The heavy vehicle slammed on its brakes, blocking the street. The doors flew open. Rebecca backed away, her hands raised, trembling violently. "No, no, no!" Footsteps crunched heavily on the gravel behind her. She spun around. Daniel emerged from the tree line. He was breathing heavily, his dark wool coat snagged on a branch, his immaculate hair disheveled. He stopped 10 feet away from her. The men from the Escalade fanned out, forming an inescapable half-circle around them. The world seemed to stop spinning. The birds went quiet. Daniel looked at her. He took in her tear-stained face, her exhausted, trembling frame, and finally, his gaze dropped to the soft curve of her belly, hidden beneath the bulky grey hoodie. When he looked back up at her face, the ruthless Mafia boss was gone. In his eyes, there was only the shattered, terrified man who loved her. "You ran," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking, stepping slowly toward her, as if she were a wild animal about to bolt. "You took my heart, you took my child, and you ran into the dark." Rebecca trembled, her back pressed against the cold metal of a parked station wagon, nowhere left to run. Daniel stood 10 feet away, the undisputed king of New York's underworld, looking entirely shattered. His men, usually stoic and unmoving, shifted uncomfortably, turning their backs to give their boss a sliver of privacy on the quiet suburban street. "Daniel, don't," Rebecca pleaded, her voice cracking. She wrapped both arms protectively over her soft, round stomach, her oversized grey hoodie doing nothing to hide the gesture. "Don't take me back there. You can have anything you want in this world, but you can't have this. I won't let you turn my child into a target." Daniel didn't step closer. Instead, right there on the damp Pennsylvania asphalt, the ruthless Mafia boss dropped heavily to his knees. The sight was so jarring, so completely foreign to everything Daniel Castellano was, that Rebecca gasped. "I didn't know," Daniel said, his voice a raw, agonizing scrape. He looked up at her, his obsidian eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Rebecca, I swear on my soul I didn't know you were pregnant. If I had known, I would have burned the city to the ground a month ago just to buy you peace. You think I want my heir growing up the way I did? You think I want our baby learning to check under the car for explosives before they learn to drive?" "Then let us go," she cried, a tear finally spilling over her eyelashes. "You live in a war zone. Dom, last week you came to bed with someone else's blood on your shirt. I can't be the soft, fat, happy wife waiting for you in a mansion while you slaughter people, and I will not let a baby be born into a house where the doors are locked from the outside." Daniel swallowed hard, his hands resting on his thighs. "The blood on my shirt. It was Lorenzo Rossi's. He tried to ambush Matteo in the warehouse district. I killed him to protect my underboss. It was the last hit, Rebecca. The absolute last. There is always a last hit, Daniel. It never ends. It ended last night," he stated firmly, his voice suddenly shifting from desperate to intensely focused. "Why do you think I was downstairs waiting for that text from Chicago? Why do you think I ignored you on our anniversary?" Rebecca blinked, confused. "You were receiving a shipment, weapons, or drugs." "I was receiving a wire transfer confirmation," Daniel corrected, slowly reaching into his dark wool overcoat. Rebecca flinched, but he only pulled out a folded sheaf of heavy watermarked paper. He tossed it onto the asphalt between them. "I sold it, Rebecca. All of it. The ports, the unions, the protection rackets, the gambling rings. I sold my entire territory to the Chicago outfit." Rebecca stared at the papers, fluttering gently in the morning breeze, her mind struggling to comprehend his words. You sold the syndicate. You wanted a real private name to prove I'm serious. Look at the letterhead." Daniel urged, his eyes locked onto hers. "I hired Baker McKenzie, the largest corporate law firm in the world. I had a team of 300 legitimate lawyers working around the clock for 6 months to structure a massive legal buyout. The money was routed through 12 different shell companies and landed in a blind trust in Geneva last night at 1 a.m. That's what the celebration was for. That's why I was downstairs. I was securing our exit." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Rebecca stared at him, her chest heaving. "You're lying. Nobody just walks away from the commission. They do, when they hand over a $2 billion empire on a silver platter," Daniel said quietly. "I did it for you, because I knew the cage was killing you, because I wanted to sit in a quiet kitchen and watch you bake bread and never have to carry a gun again. I was coming upstairs to tell you we were leaving for Europe today, but you were already gone." Guilt, sharp and sudden, pierced Rebecca's heart. She looked down at her heavy, soft body, then back up to the man kneeling before her on the street. He had given up his crown, his power, everything he had built, just so she could feel safe. "Dom," she whispered, taking a hesitant step toward him. Before her foot could touch the ground, the morning air was ripped apart by a deafening roar. A heavy armor-plated grey SUV came tearing around the corner of the suburban street, its tires shrieking against the pavement. The tinted windows dropped. The glint of automatic weapons caught the morning sun. The Rossi family hadn't been defeated. They had been tracking the chaos. They had followed the sudden massive movement of Castellano's men and Daniel's private jet right to Pennsylvania. "Boss, get down!" Vincent screamed, drawing his weapon. Time dilated. Daniel didn't draw his gun. He didn't dive for cover. His only instinct, honed by a singular obsessive love, was to protect the woman standing in front of him. He lunged forward with explosive speed. He hit Rebecca's waist, tackling her backward into the thick, overgrown grass of the residential lawn, wrapping his massive frame entirely over her soft body. He cradled the back of her head, pressing her face into his chest, entirely shielding her pregnant stomach with his own torso. The street erupted into a terrifying symphony of violence. Automatic gunfire shattered the quiet neighborhood. Windows blew out of the parked cars. Daniel's men returned fire with ruthless, trained precision. Rebecca screamed, her hands clutching frantically at Daniel's turtleneck, as the deafening cracks of gunfire echoed around them. She felt the heavy thump of Daniel's heart against her cheek, steady and strong. Then she felt his body violently jolt. A sickening thwack sounded right above her ear. Daniel let out a sharp, breathless grunt, his grip on her tightening to the point of bruising. "Dom!" Rebecca shrieked, struggling beneath him. "Daniel, stay down!" He roared, his voice strained and tight with sudden agony. He didn't budge an inch, remaining a human shield over her and their unborn child. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. The heavy-caliber rounds from Vincent and Leo's weapons decimated the Rossi SUV. The engine block cracked hissing steam, and the vehicle slammed into an oak tree. The firing abruptly stopped, replaced by the eerie sound of car alarms and hissing radiators. "Clear!" Vincent shouted, kicking the weapons away from the motionless bodies inside the SUV. "Street is secure. We have locals calling the cops, boss. We have 90 seconds before sirens." Rebecca pushed against Daniel's chest. "Dom, let me up. Let me see you." Daniel slowly rolled off her, grimacing. Rebecca scrambled to her knees, her hands frantically checking his face, his chest. Then she saw it. A dark, spreading stain of crimson soaking into the upper left shoulder of his black turtleneck. "You're shot!" she gasped, her hands shaking violently as they hovered over the wound. "Oh my God, you took a bullet for me." "It's a through and through." Daniel gritted out his face, pale. He reached out with his good arm, gripping her thick thigh to steady himself. "It didn't hit the bone. Are you hurt? Did anything hit you?" "The baby?" "No, I'm fine. We're fine." She sobbed, tears streaming freely down her face now. "You stupid, beautiful idiot, you shielded me." "Always," he whispered, pressing a bloody kiss to her forehead. "I will always shield you." The interior of Daniel's private medical helicopter smelled of antiseptic and adrenaline. The thumping of the rotors vibrated through Rebecca's bones. They had barely made it out of the Pennsylvania suburbs before the local police arrived, whisked away to a private airfield where Daniel's discreet medical team was waiting. Daniel lay on the leather gurney, his shirt cut away, a thick white pressure bandage taped tightly over his shoulder. He was pale from blood loss, but his dark eyes never left Rebecca, who sat in the seat right beside him, her soft hand clamped tightly in his uninjured one. "You're going to be okay," the private doctor muttered, packing his kit. "Clean entry and exit. You'll need physical therapy, but there's no permanent nerve damage." Daniel ignored the doctor. He looked at Rebecca, his thumb weakly stroking the back of her knuckles. "I brought something else with me." Daniel said, his voice raspy over the hum of the helicopter. "Vincent." Vincent, sitting in the co-pilot seat, unbuckled and walked back. He handed a thick leather satchel to Daniel. Daniel struggled to sit up, slightly wincing as he unzipped the bag. He pulled out 3 dark blue passports and a set of keys. He placed them in Rebecca's lap. Rebecca looked down. The passports were legitimate, issued by the Swiss government. One had Daniel's face with a new name. One had her face with a new name. The third was blank, waiting for a birth certificate. "The Baker McKenzie Trust documents are in there too," Daniel said quietly, "along with a deed to a vineyard in Tuscany. Fully staffed, completely off the grid, and heavily secured by private contractors. It's yours, Rebecca." She looked up at him, her vision blurring with tears. "Ours. It's ours." Daniel shook his head slowly. "If you want it to be. But I meant what I said on the street. I am out of the life. I am a civilian now. But I know what I put you through. I know I terrified you. If you still want to run, if you still think I am a danger to you or our baby—" He swallowed hard, the vulnerability in his eyes more painful to witness than the gunshot wound. "I will let you go. The money is in your name. The property is yours. You can take the jet anywhere in the world, and I swear to you, on my life, I will never track you down again. I will stay in New York, and I will wipe the Rossi family off the face of the earth so they can never look for you. And then I will leave you in peace." He was giving her the ultimate choice. The gilded cage was truly broken. The door was wide open, and he was handing her the map to fly away. Rebecca looked at the passports. She looked at her soft stomach. Then she looked at the man who had taken a bullet for her, who had dismantled an empire of blood just to see her smile, who worshipped her body and her soul with an intensity that burned brighter than the sun. She picked up the Swiss passports. She picked up the keys, and she leaned forward, carefully, wrapping her arms around his uninjured shoulder, pressing her face into the crook of his neck. "I don't want to bake bread alone," she whispered fiercely, her tears soaking into his skin. "I want you in the kitchen with me. I want you to feel the baby kick. I want you, Daniel, only you. Just no more blood." Daniel let out a shuddering breath, burying his face in her hair. His good arm wrapped around her thick waist, pulling her flush against him. "No more blood," he vowed. "I promise you, Gattina. We are done." 6 months later, the sun set over the rolling green hills of Tuscany, casting a golden glow over the stone patio of the Villa Rosa. Rebecca stood at the edge of the terrace, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the olive trees. She wore a light, flowing linen dress that perfectly framed her heavily pregnant, beautifully round stomach. She looked healthier than she had in years. The anxiety that used to live in her bones had melted away, replaced by the warm, grounding peace of the Italian countryside. She heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind her. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind a warm chest pressing against her back. Large hands, completely devoid of calluses or weapons, rested lovingly on her swollen belly. "He's kicking again," Daniel murmured, kissing the side of her neck. He wore a simple white t-shirt and linen pants. The scar on his shoulder was a faded memory. He looked rested. He looked happy. "She," Rebecca corrected, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "I'm telling you, Dom, it's a girl. Boy or girl, they are going to be the most spoiled child in Italy. He smiled, pressing another kiss to her cheek. They stood together in the fading light, watching the horizon. There were no sirens. There were no bodyguards at the door. There was only the scent of baking bread wafting from the kitchen, the rustle of the olive trees, and the unbreakable bond of a love that had survived the dark and finally found the light. Rebecca rested her hands over Daniel's finally safe, finally free, and deeply, unconditionally loved. Daniel truly gave up his entire underworld empire just to keep his pregnant wife safe, proving that true love can conquer even the darkest demons. Did you expect the Baker Mackenzie twist, or did you think he was still a mobster at heart? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this intense romantic Mafia escape story, please smash that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible real-life dramas.